Welcome back, Rosebuds. If it's your first time here, a very special welcome. The content on our channel is like that old 90s show, Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction. Today we have 4 true horrific wolf encounters. Some are possibly paranormal, and some are not. And of course, we have our one story that is a work of complete fiction written by yours truly. Try and guess which story is the creative fiction imposter, and make sure to listen all the way to the end where I will reveal which story was fictitious. So sit back, dim the lights, and settle in for 5 terrifying wolf tales to tell in the dark. Story number 1, On the Prowl. I'm from New Hampshire, so fairly used to wilderness. I went to Canada, just north of Minnesota, to camp and hike with some friends. However, one of my friends became very sick. Not sure why, but I decided I would stay behind for the 1 to 2 days it would take them to bring him in to get cared for. After they left, I quickly began to get a little unsettled and had this odd feeling as it got dark. Hard to explain, but I felt very uneasy. I chalked it up to the weird weather and odd silence of the day. Also, it was very humid, and everything felt still with no wind. It was cloudy, so it got dark quickly. Anyway, I'm used to being on my own, so once I settled in and it got dark, I felt fine. It was pretty late when I decided to head into the tent. In case you've never been camping, one thing about tents is you can hear everything. I heard what sounded like footsteps, maybe 40 or 50 feet away. I assumed it was a bear looking for scraps and it would move on. I had nothing in the tent, and because it was likely a black bear, I'm not particularly scared of them. Black bears are pretty docile, but I continued to hear footsteps, and it soon became clear that there was more than one animal out there, so it definitely wasn't a bear. Also, bears tend to breathe loudly and sniff. They make a lot of noise. This was a sneaky sound that would wander and come back, each time making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I cracked the tent opening just a little and looked out, but it was too dark to see. Eventually, I was like, screw it. I grabbed the .45 and a flashlight. I opened the tent door and scanned the area with my light to find 8 huge gray wolves staring at me. That was just what I could see. 3 right in front of me, and at least 4 to 5 pairs of eyes further out from there. Who knows how many more? I'm not particularly scared of wolves either, but I was alone and had nowhere to go for protection, like a car or trailer, and was literally in the middle of nowhere. It's also the dead of night, like 1:30 a.m., so it wasn't going to get light out for at least 2 hours. I just stood there and looked at them to see what their body language told me. It looked like they were on the hunt. If I didn't have my protection from my .45, I have no idea what I would have done. If they had wanted to eat me, my firearm might have done little considering the size of the pack. I always thought that wolves were the size of like big dogs or huskies, but not so. They are anatomically built different, like way bigger. I just curled up in my sleeping bag with my .45 and all the magazines I had, put my buck knife on my ankle, and sat wide awake until the sun came up. Eventually, they did move on, but I was too amped up to sleep. When the sun came up, I started a fire and went about my business as usual. I will say this, because of that experience, I never camp alone. I suggest y'all do the same. Story number 2, Something Wrong with That Wolf. In the summer of 1997, I was 15 years old. My dad had recently remarried, sold his house, and moved in with his new wife who lived in rural eastern Idaho. I usually spent summers with my dad, so I decided to move up to their house for the summer. I didn't really know anyone in the area except my stepmom's nephew, who was a year younger than me. So if I wasn't hanging out with him, I was playing N64 watching a movie, or jumping on the trampoline, etc. My stepmom kept her trampoline in the front yard. I loved that thing. Spent hours on it perfecting my backflips and tricks and playing pretend WWE with my step-cousin. I also spent a few cold-ass rural Idaho summer nights on the trampoline, buried in my sleeping bag trying to tough out the cold. There were a few houses around us, but most of the area was just rural farmland and trees. Directly across the street from my parents' house was an irrigation canal, maybe 20 feet wide and fairly deep. Beyond that was a massive field with those giant hay bales scattered across. Then about a half a mile beyond the field was a large tree line. My dad was a musician and would often play gigs, which is where he was going to be that evening. My stepmom was out with her daughter. It was around late June at this point, and I'm the only one home. The sun is getting ready to set. I'm out on the trampoline just sitting, enjoying the cool air. I'm facing the field across the road when I see something come out from the tree line at the end of the field. It looked like a huge wolf, something I'd never seen in the area before. I jump off the tramp and walk to our property line to get a better look. Judging from my distance, I would have estimated it to be about 4 feet tall, perhaps more. It's just walking around when all of a sudden it looks towards me and just stops. It's staring at me now, and the hairs on the back of my neck raise up. I've never felt anything like this. I knew I should have probably run back into the house, but I couldn't take my eyes off of this wolf. I was totally mesmerized. Then, shit got weird. All of a sudden, this frickin' thing stands up on its hind legs to get a better look at me. I about soiled myself right there. At this point, I did run back into the house. I went straight to the nearest window to keep an eye on it, but it was gone. I locked my doors and waited trembling in fear for my stepmom to finally come home. The only person I immediately told was my older brother the next day, who wanted to go into the tree line to look for it. Nope, just nope. I never slept outside on the trampoline again. I spent most of the summer there, but fortunately, never saw that wolf again. Story number 3. Should have known better. When I first moved to Minnesota, I should have given it more consideration that the wildlife on the hiking trails would be more plentiful. It just didn't occur to me, having come from Southern Cal. It had been a long winter that first year, and the second it got warm, I hit the trails with my partner. We had chosen a trail that wasn't too off the beaten path. It was well maintained, and there were quite a few cars in the dirt lot. However, we'd not seen any people that day on the trail. To be fair, it was the middle of the week when we decided to go. This was an out and back hike. We got to the end, then started to head back. As we just turned a bend, we see what looked like a dog. Not unusual since people hike with their dogs. Then, as we get closer, we realize there's a small pack with larger dogs and smaller pups. We hung back and watched the pack cross the path. I was holding my breath as I realized these were not dogs. They were wolves. One of them, presumably the pack leader, stopped and stared right at us. I thought I was going to shit myself. We froze. I was torn between backing up slowly or just staying put. We didn't move. Then it just turned and left. We stood there for a moment, not saying anything and not daring to move. After some time, it was obvious they weren't going to come back. We were going to leave them alone, and they were going to leave us alone. When we got home, I did a little internet research and was astonished to find out that Minnesota had one of the largest wolf populations in the lower 48. It was apparently one of the last places they'd migrated to when they were becoming extinct. Minnesota jumped on board with preservation for the wolves, and then the population began to recover. All facts aside, that was terrifying. I'll still go hiking because I love it, but next time, I might take better precautions. Story number 4, Eerie Yellow Eyes. For context, I'm from Missouri, specifically a more rural area of smaller towns, about 45 to 50 minutes away from St. Louis. My grandfather owned a property that he originally used for hunting and camping somewhere in the Mark Twain National Forest, about an hour and a half or so away. When my grandfather was alive, he would often take me down here for camping trips and such. I was a child at the time. One particular trip, me and him had arrived and planned to stay one night by ourselves. Then the rest of the family was going to come down the next day. By the time we got to the property, it was late in the evening, so all we did was set up and go to sleep. A bit of time later, after settling down, I found myself waking up in the middle of the night. Now, our tent was stationed directly across from the ruins of the old hunting cabin that my grandfather had built. Unfortunately, it had burnt down some years before this. I woke up with a strange, eerie feeling, like something was watching me. Then, from the slightly opened flap in the tent, I saw a pair of what appeared to be glowing yellow eyes staring at me from the ruins of the cabin. I woke my grandfather up, but he ignored me and told me to go back to sleep. I kept staring at these apparent eyes for what seemed like hours until I finally did pass out. The next morning, I looked around the area of the cabin, but saw nothing that could reflect light like that. What I did find was a pair of paw prints in the ash of the cabin, making me think that perhaps what I saw was a large, lone wolf. Story number 5, Night Ride. Back in the 1990s, my in-laws had a cabin up in northern Minnesota in the Tower Sudan area. I'd recently taken to mountain biking and was doing it at every opportunity. It was a night with a full moon, and I had a small headlight. I figured I'd go on a night ride up to the local campground where there was a bike trail into town some miles away. As I was riding, I noted the moon was so bright it was actually casting the shadow of me and my bike on the ground. You could hear the sound of crickets all around me. Other than that, it was very quiet. The night air was cool and crisp. I had ridden a couple of miles east from the campground when all of a sudden I started hearing what sounded like dogs howling, but more aggressively. Then, before long, I could start hearing echoes of more of this near and far all around me. Possibly coyotes or even wolves, since we were only 15 miles away from Eli, where they have the wolf center. I wasn't sure what kind of animal it was, but I turned tail and headed back to the cabin as fast as I could. The next day, in the safety of daylight, I went on a bike ride on the same trail and saw wolf scat in a number of locations where I'd ridden. They'd not sounded too far away when I was hearing them the night before. After that, I took care not to ride along in the evenings after the sun went down. Well, Rosebuds, that's it for today's stories. Before I do the reveal for our fictional wolf tale, take a moment to leave us a comment down below on which was your favorite story today. Alright, let's do our reveal. Today's fictional story was story number 3, Should Have Known Better, about the 2 hikers who crossed paths with a wolf pack while they were hiking. If I have inspiration that sparks my creative fictional tales, I often share that. Today's story is actually very similar to an encounter I had when I first moved to New England. We were out hiking just after spring 2 years ago, and the thing is, we felt like it was more of a nature walk than a hike, because not even 50 meters away, there was a suburban neighborhood with a road that was parallel to the trail. Well, we're walking along, we round a bend, and suddenly, about 40 feet up the path, is a black mama bear and her 2 cubs. She lifts her head, stares us down, and we slowly started backing up. when we were out of sight, we diverted off trail and bushwhacked it back up to the road where the neighborhood was. So the part of my made-up tale that expresses the paralyzing fear, that part was all true. Coming from Arizona and hiking many, many, many trails all over that state day and night, I've never encountered any larger wildlife like that. No apex predators. So that was an extremely scary experience, and I now carry bear mace with me when I hike, just in case. But I also since learned that black bears are common here, and in fact, we have a resident bear who every fall traipses around our suburban neighborhood doing his annual autumn dumpster diving, knocking over trash cans and upsetting all the neighborhood dogs. Anyway, that's a wrap, Rosebuds. Thanks for listening. Until next time, take care and stay creepy.